Okay, we are live.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the June 27th meeting of the P&I Committee. First item on the agenda, can I get a motion in a second, please, to adopt the minutes from our April meeting? So, in a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. All right, our first presentation today is on the Stockton University 2020 Facilities Master Plan. Brad.
Morning, commissioners. Got a PowerPoint, some PowerPoint slides to show. So just hold a second.
I'm assuming that's correct, it's 2020.
Yep.
That's correct.
Fine.
So it's fine.
Takes us a while. You'll see why.
We're gonna be,
As long as we get an explanation of that.
Sorry about that. All right, let's see real quick if this works. If not, you'll have to sit here.
thank you. All right, so we'll just, I know all of you are familiar with Stockton University. At this point, they've got campuses in multiple towns now. But today's discussion is really going to be focused on their main campus at Gallo Township. It's outlined in blue. The upper portion is a preserved area. We'll talk about a little bit further. But the lower blue outlined area is the sort of the main campus. As you can see here, we've got our management areas on here. So this campus is split between the regional growth area and the rural development area. And overall, it's about 1,800 acres plus. So usually when I'm giving the executive director report presentations, it's on municipal conformance. This is slightly different. It has to do with what the CMP calls a state agency plan. So the CMP allows state agencies to submit comprehensive plans to the commission that, sort of is supposed to help assist in long-range planning of, whatever the jurisdiction is that a state agency has. So the CMP outlines what these plans need to contain, standards for approval, and upon approval, as the agency goes about with its development, they have to submit applications to go through the normal public development process. And, they sort of, any sort of special pre-negotiated or pre-evaluated aspects of their long-range plans are sort of taken into consideration during that review process. Again, I would say, at the bottom that everyone should really think of this as a master plan. It's sort of big concept ideas. It's not, it's not specific site plans. And there's a varying degree of the level of site detail work that they've done. So some projects are a little more close to fruition in terms of an application. Others are more conceptual in nature. So, as Commissioner Rittler Sanchez correctly noted, this is the 2020 master plan, and here we are in 2025. In order to explain sort of why it's taken us this long, we kind of even have to go back further in terms of the history of planning here at Stockton's main campus. I'll also say that in terms of our state agency plans that we've ever received or reviewed and approved, we're pretty sure it's likely limited to Stockton. We don't see a whole lot of these. But this is the third iteration of Stockton's sort of master plan submission. So the first one was submitted back in 1990. Essentially at that time, the campus was entirely within a rural development area. And while it had existing sewer infrastructure, any sort of planned expansions or that were coinciding with expected rises in student enrollment were constrained by that rural development area designation. So that 99 plan coincided with the township doing a rezoning of the campus, which led to the commission approving about a 500 acre redesignation of rural development to regional growth area. Additionally, at that time, the commission entered into the first MOA with Stockton. And that was to help sort of effectuate, streamline permitting around the different plans that were included in that first master plan. That original plan, so giving you an idea, this is a screenshot from the original plan, so apologies for the quality of it. Again, the area outlined in blue is sort of that main campus area. And the area outlined in yellow, orange, that was the area that was redesignated to regional growth area. So fast forward to 2010, again, the campus was, or the university was anticipating increases in student enrollment. They had, new plans for expanding the campus. So they wanted to come back in with a revised master plan. At that time, as part of, I guess, the discussions with the commission, one of the things that really needed to be addressed on campus was the, updated delineations around the locations of wetlands buffers, also additional studies and surveys around certain threatened and endangered species. And a lot of that work was done prior to the 2010 plan. So it was incorporated into that plan and really kind of locked in the pockets of the areas where development really could take place. At that time, one of the conditions for the commission approving that plan was that it was conditioned on the university deed restricting those areas that were, designated for conservation. And that deed was recorded in 2010. Just like in the first iteration, this also coincided with the township doing another rezoning, and again, another 450 acres were redesignated to regional growth area. And again, there was another MOA executed that, again, was to help facilitate, streamline the permitting of the plan of the proposed work in that master plan. Oops, sorry. So to give you an idea of, again, sort of where the redesignations were occurring, the hashed area in the southwest corner, and that other hashed area a little further to the east, those were the areas that were redesignated for regional growth as regional growth area. And this was a map that was from that original executive director's report, or for the 2010 master plan, and it showed areas in green that were going to be preserved. It highlighted some exception areas, and had some footprints around expected areas where development would occur. And this is sort of the beginning of some of the issues that ensued soon after the second MOA was executed. So around 2016, it was determined that the university had undertaken some development in one of the areas that was in the deed restricted area. And through trying to sort out, sort of why that had occurred, one of the things that was sort of discovered was that, that initial mapping that was incorporated into the deed restriction didn't include areas of existing infrastructure, utilities, roads, and necessary improvements that were anticipated. So as we were sort of sorting through all of this, all of Stockton's applications were put on hold due to the violations that had occurred. So a framework was sort of established as to like what the next steps would be for Stockton to resolve these issues. And one of the first ones was, getting sort of the mapping straightened out, having a more accurate and detailed map around where all the existing roads and infrastructure were and what the intentions were about necessary improvements around those. And that was brought to the P&I committee in November of 2022. In that proposal, They had found 33 acres of land that met that criteria of existing infrastructure and areas for necessary improvements. And as a result, they had to find an additional 35 acres of undeveloped land to sort of offset what was being taken out of the deed restricted area. This would also require, and that was reviewed by P&I. There was really no objections. Stockton went off to request the amendment to the deed restriction. They submitted that request to the DEP in June of 2023. So during that time, they also started working on their new master plan, which is why, it was also put on hold along with the applications as Stockton was sort of working through this framework. They also submitted a plan for resolving sort of the identified violations. We received that in January 2024. The DEP approved the deed restriction amendment in 2024 as well, and that was recorded just last March. So again, to highlight, there was a lot of moving pieces here that was sort of holding up both our review of this, and as you recall in recent months, a lot of the Stockton applications that you received. So this map essentially is kind of showing you what is changing in terms of the deed restriction. So the grayed out areas are the areas where the first deed restriction covered, and there's really no change to it. The areas in pink and green are the areas where changes are occurring. So the pink areas are the areas that were being removed from the original deed of conservation restriction. And as you can tell, it kind of looks like they look like roads.
Yep.
So they are roads. Some of them also are areas where there's existing infrastructure like like water storage tanks and other sort of facilities. And the green areas are the areas that were added. They are undeveloped and wooded. So overall, it's a net increase of 2 acres. And in general, at this point, the university has about 2/3 of their campus. Next slide. Oh, and I'll get before we move on from this slide, I would just sort of highlight that the areas in that regional growth orange, those are really the areas where development can occur on this campus. That's really what the university is locked into. Sorry, it's not working. And so, this is one of the maps that's included in the 2020 plan. They sort of outline the general areas of development. And if you go through the plan, they have additional, more details about each of these 8 specific development areas and what they're intending. I'll say, the sort of northern areas, they generally have existing development. So, it's really, plans for renovation and redevelopment in areas that are already pretty disturbed and developed. And the areas sort of on the southern portion of the campus, numbers 4, 5, and 6, that's really where, the plans would be for new development in areas that currently where none exists. I'll mention that those areas are also where I would say the master plan is most conceptual. A lot of the most detailed plans and priorities in the master plan are really in the core campus area, which is number 8, big one in the middle, and number 3 at the top where there's sustaining residential apartments. So just to kind of help contextualize some of the things that you've been seeing from regarding Stockton in recent months. Starting in May of last year, you saw the first 2 public applications come through, one for an irrigation well, another for a water well for vehicle maintenance. You saw a couple more earlier this year, and there's going to be more to come. At this point, it's important to say that there's no future MOA under discussion. So any sort of applications that are going to be, or all applications that are submitted by Stockton are going to be public development applications that will be coming before commission to review. And, you know, like any other public development application, you know, we're ensuring that all the development proposed is meeting our wetlands requirements, all of our minimum environmental standards, and the revised ensuring that none of that development is occurring in deep restricted areas. And I think that was my last slide. So, you know, there's not really, I'll say it's important just to keep in mind that this is this document is really a master plan. It's really sort of the conceptual plans for what, the university is looking to carry out between 2020 and 2030. A lot of the bigger, larger development proposals in this plan haven't really moved forward. And so, none of these proposals are binding. Obviously, they're very much impacted by funding that Stockton gets, enrollment numbers. So it's really just it's a master plan document, and any sort of final plan and development applications, we're going to get reviewed again, and they may differ from what's actually in this plan because we're now 5 years removed, and the university may be already sort of maybe even working on their next master plan. So at this point, today, in terms of what we are looking for from the committee, is I'll say at this point, we are recommending that this state agency plan be approved, and we're looking for a committee's recommendations to the full commission on whether.
Thank you. I mean, I feel
Lot of
like
history.
it's just an incredible amount of work, and the way that you laid it out and explained it, really, really incredible. So thank you, and to the whole team, because this is super helpful. Does anyone have any questions? Jessica, go ahead.
Okay. I agree, it was very nice stuff. I do have some questions though. How many, is Stockton contained in one watershed, or does it straddle watersheds? No,
That's a good question.
thank you.
We can look into that.
Okay. Did they give any estimate, just general, like what, with major places that they want to add to, what either the square footage might be, or the number of units they want to add, so we can sort of estimate what kind of additional water and sewerage capacity they want.
Sure, so, I'll say core campus developments are more fully fleshed out, where they actually give estimates on square footage, estimates on costs. The residential developments, they're in the area number 3, they're looking at
And that would be like dorms.
Dorms,
Not,
Yeah,
not,
right. Yeah, that's what I meant, because I meant dormitory residential, not.
Just to remind everyone, the MOA that was done, or actually it was the approval of the 22 plan. They identified 8 development areas. They also do their stormwater as part of that.
Okay.
So even though it's conceptual, a lot of those types of issues were addressed.
Okay, so the impervious cover they've estimated they would be able to do stormwater. I'm thinking more about the water treatment or supply aspect of it, and are we able to take, rather than a well by well application, series of applications, do we have any idea what the maximum, so we can get an overall picture of water withdrawal?
I don't think that information is in the plan, it's showing it's really.
So I probably would,
And we wouldn't be able to, so we don't have anything based on.
so we would at least look at cumulative, if the curve was going and see.
Well, so there are applications pretty well. And they trigger the fancy.
But that would be well by well or cumulative? trigger the curve.
would require at least one application, and then we would look at.
You do like a cube.
Well, right, we would look at if they already have existing wells, if they're proposing a new well, that. But we're really not at that point in terms of the new development. I mean, they're already, if I'm remembering right, one of the big projects that's in the master plans for a new athletic complex, and they're already back away from that.
Yeah.
So, you know, or ever, so it's hard to, but I think that, and you mentioned stormwater, Stacy, and they're gonna have to redo stormwater under our new rules, right? So,
The way we did the 8 areas was we designated sort of the building pocket or the development area, and they were limited in terms of how much development they could do in each pocket. And then so they will have to redo their stormwater
So it might
and
change.
the existing rules.
Right.
But, you know, the pockets were very much defined and constrained, not the development that was gonna occur in the pocket itself.
that was really our focus, was limits to disturbance and keeping. So the rest of what you're talking about is equally important, but we don't have information in place to do that.
I was wondering about Rick, he and I recommend acceptance of this plan without any limitation or constraints put on it as to the water rights.
Well, right, so I guess the only thing we could say is when and if they proceed with development, the water will become, if they need a new, you know, if they need new wells. Standard, we'll be evaluating that at that point, but they're not gonna come in, you know, with applications for everything, it's gonna be a piecemeal, and that does make it like tricky.
Right.
Yeah.
But if, do you know what the status of this watershed is? As far as the water supply plan, whether it's in deficit?
We're all gonna stare at Gina, so.
Yeah, right. Makes me feel uncomfortable.
Oh, so pull up the website and,
No,
go to that list, please.
As a planner, part of planning is being able to anticipate future conditions, so that's just what my concern.
I don't remember this specific one,
Right.
but I can tell you that most of the available water in the Pinelands area is focused down here. Down in this neck of the woods.
Okay. So there is availability.
Yes, I believe there's available here.
You're gonna be hopefully get over the drain.
Well, right, I would have to go pull up.
That's okay.
I think we have guidance on our website.
Those are just my questions, because those are things, like I said, as a planner, I'm thinking about before I give a recommendation, if we don't have anything. It wouldn't hurt if we would acknowledge that, yeah, don't say, oh yeah, the plan's great, we're accepting it, but. Yeah, we think you've done a good job here, it's a good plan, but be aware that, you know, and that you may have constraints. Impose some of these things based on water supply or whatever conditions are. I don't know if you put any of
Well,
those qualifications in there.
right, so I don't think that we have those qualifications in our report to the commission, but Stockton is well aware of them. We've had those discussions. Over time and recently, they're aware of the potential constraints.
Having discussions with putting it in writing doesn't even make any difference apparently with Stockton's history, but it would be very nice for me as a commissioner to have it.
Yeah, I mean, we share some of those concerns, the long history with Stockton has shown that, you know, especially people change, people have their own ideas about what requires application and where development can go. I think that, we're in a much better place with this plan and the amended deed restriction than we were prior version, which was blobs on a map, not very well defined. Nobody really understanding, you know, the status of things. This is much better, much easier to use and pull up and the maps are accurate, they're detailed, the deed restriction is very clear. And the fact that we're not allowing for any streamlined application procedures anymore means the commission itself will get to review and act on all projects, all development, rather than having to go through a quick process where you don't see them. So I think, you know, we tried to build some of that into the process, just for greater certainty and less confusion on our part and so. No, I mean, is it perfect? No, but I think it's much better than prior plans, deeds, maps. And what we were working with before.
If I might add, Mike, and I'm not overly concerned about any major impacts from subdivision. I mean, they've been pretty, maybe not procedurally very good actors, but I think that they care about what they're doing to their,
Absolutely.
to the site, and they've been very good about the way, what the infrastructure they put in generally, and, so they're pretty much forward thinking. I didn't want to give that impression that I'm considering it this to be a major impact. It's just looking forward to having things laid out a little bit, as long as they know what there's some constraints are, but otherwise. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you. Any other commissioners have questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I have one for the
Oh.
director. Thanks. Susan, do you anticipate a time where the commission might want to try to renew the MOA with Stockton or compose a new MOA with them?
I don't, no, I think that, past history has shown that really didn't work.
Hmm.
And I don't know that we would be, maybe there'll be a point in the future when we're comfortable doing that again, but I don't think that'll be for quite a while.
Mhm. All
And
right.
I also don't really think it's necessary, honestly, but, time will tell, I guess. We're gonna have to get through the backlog of applications that we've had sitting, waiting for the amended deed restriction to be recorded and plan to be approved. Once we get through all of that and see what new development they may wanna talk about, maybe we consider it at that point, but
Mhm.
not really on my radar screen for the near future.
I understand. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Laura, I just have one question. Does, if the commission chooses to endorse this master plan, does it have any relationship to any of the satellite campuses that the Stockton maintains? Is that correct?
I'll say, Alan, that the master plan references the other facilities at the other campuses. The only campus that it really has any proposed development is the one related to Atlantic City. In terms of the Hamilton campus, there, it's really just states what the facilities are. So I think from our perspective, approving this plan really is really strictly looking at, main campus of Galveston.
That's within our jurisdiction, and that was where I was hoping we would be focused on.
All right, thanks, Alan. Any other questions or comments? All right, so can I get a motion and a second to recommend this to go to the full commission?
I'll move it
Thank you, Jerry.
and I'll second it.
Thank you, Mark. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great, thank you, and thanks again for all the work that has gone into not just the presentation, but the whole process over the past 10,000 years.
And I'll just mention Katie, I had Katie here today, she was also working on the report and review of this, so, team effort.
Thanks, of course, thank you so much, thank you. All right, next up on the agenda, we have Stacy on some solar energy facilities updates. So I'll turn it over to you.
I know this has been divided, in terms of what the regulatory updates are into use solar. In terms of regulatory updates, the Board of Public Utilities adopted its commercial solar incentive program and regulations for that, in December of this past year. And I'm just gonna go straight into dual use agrivoltaics, because that's the pilot program that we've been discussing over time. Oops,
Down is forward.
there it goes.
Yeah.
So,
That's a nice polite little sound.
Right, exactly. Almighty mess up sounds in life for that pleasant.
so, the incentive program that BPU has SREX 2 is the next generation of its incentive programs to encourage solar. It's part of the master plan to bring New Jersey ultimately to full green energy. I believe it's 35 or 36. The this is just sort of a background for you. The Dual Use Solar Energy Act was passed in 2021. This required or directed BPU to adopt regulations to implement a pilot program for dual use solar or agrovoltaics. The act called for 200 megawatts over 3 years, but authorized BPU to extend the program for an additional 2 years, 1 year at a time, with an additional 50 megawatts a year. So ultimately, the program could be as high as 300 megawatts. As you may recall, with dual use solar, what we're talking about is a study of utilizing solar in an active agricultural or horticultural use. And the reason for the pilot is to get an idea of how does that work? How does it impact the horticulture or the agriculture? And what sort of generation are they getting? It really is a new area, and Rutgers has been extremely involved in this. They are a consultant to BPU on this project. They are very much involved in terms of assisting BPU with reviewing applications, understanding technology, assisting farmers with developing the research aspect of their projects. So with regard to dual use solar, BPU approved moving forward with a rule proposal and actually launched dual use, I'm just going to simplify it, dual use pilot program in October of 2024. The rule was published in December of 2024, and the comment period closed at the end of January in 2025. The way the program works, it's set forth in the order of the October order, is the first thing BPU will do is send out a notice of incentive availability. And that advises the agricultural and horticultural community that they can submit a pre-application, this is a pre-application process, to BPU, explaining what the proposed project would be, and BPU would then move on through its steps. So, and this is BPU's application process. So it starts with the notice of incentive availability. At that point, someone who's interested in the project submits an expression of interest submission. The expression of interest submission is then evaluated by BPU. At that point, BPU will issue an invitation for applications. The applications will be submitted, the applications will be evaluated, there's a notice of award, and then the process starts all over again. And the reason I wanted to sort of explain this to you is because this is a 3-year pilot program, possibly a 5-year pilot program. And this process, from my perspective, is extremely time consuming and cumbersome.
So they started in January.
Correct. They started in January, the notice of incentive availability closed in February.
And it's June, and they have not progressed to the invitation.
Correct.
Right?
We did reach out to BPU to find out where they were in this process. And from what I was able to get in terms of information, which was not a lot, unfortunately, they are in the midst of the EOI evaluation process. So I cannot even tell you, even though I asked, when it is likely they're going to be sending out their invitations for applications. I was told that notice would be on their website.
I had asked Stacy to try and weasel some information out of them because I was very curious. How many projects? Are there any in the Pinelands area who expressed an interest? They won't tell us. So, I wish we could tell you that because I was very interested in is there a lot of activity?
Right.
People apply?
Right.
Nope. We have to wait.
If they don't get through their application process, by the time they run out of 3 years, well, do they have to go back and get new legislation to expand, or can they go ahead and?
The pilot is 3 years with 2 1-year extensions.
plan.
That's exactly
So
what.
they have 5 years, but the clock's ticking.
The class, right, and so are the research books.
Remember, it has to be constructed.
Right.
Right.
They gotta get it approved, permitted, constructed and operational, right, where they can evaluate. So it's, yeah, it's a big task.
But with regard to the initial, what they're called program year one, solicitation round one, and application period one. They are looking for projects to add up to a 50 MW capacity. The minimum size project that they'll accept is 500 kilowatts. The maximum size project is 10 megawatts, and the reason I put the incentive programs there is, you may recall when the last time I spoke about this. Do Solar is its own project, but it's connected to the administratively determined incentive program if you're up, which is for projects up to 5 megawatts. Or megawatts, excuse me, or you're in the commercial, the competitive solar incentive project if you're greater than 5 megawatts. What that means is, in addition to applying for the dual use solar program, you also have to apply to one of those programs, because that's where your incentive is.
And people think our regulations are complicated, let me just say that.
It is, and people wonder why bureaucracy, but people in the bureaucracy wonder why bureaucracy is a bad name. So
It's very complicated.
And in terms of the incentives with the ADI program or the administratively determined, there's a set percentage or set incentive based on the size of the project, and that's set forth in what they call the EOI guidance. So, and there's an adder based on the cost for the additional infrastructure because you're doing this in an active ag operation. For projects that are bigger than 5 megawatts that go into the commercial solar competitive solar project, they just get an incentive, but that's determined by the electric provider. So you have to. It's a very complicated process. You have to get approval from the utility provider. They have to determine what your incentive is, and then you would go back to BPU, and your applications have to be complete. The NOIA said if your applications are not complete, if you're missing any part of that process, then you have to wait till the next round.
Let's see.
So I just wanted to remind everyone.
You could do this or not.
Right.
It's wild.
Thanks.
Just to remind everyone, so in terms of CPU's citing of facilities, and this is where the issues come up in the finals. So the act itself contained various citing prohibitions. In the Pinelands, the no development within the preservation area, not the preservation area district, but the full scope of the preservation area as defined by the act. Forest areas, wetlands, both freshwater wetlands and coastal wetlands, lands preserved through the Green Acres program, and as you know, this program is not available at all for preserved farms. So it's only unpreserved farms, and then now also lands that are not preserved through Green Acres. And forested lands and transition areas, and those are transition areas to the forested lands that come from DEP's regulations.
What does forested lands,
It
it's defined, right, it's
is defined,
density of trees or
it's,
how is it?
it's the amount of acreage, the diameter of the trees. If you want those specifics, but I didn't.
It's more complication, I think so the map is showing only the first two.
Correct. Right.
Reservation areas in that kind of greeny gray in the middle. And then our forest areas, not forested areas. But
Correct.
our forest areas are the dark green. And we put this up here just to show you, I mean, this is 650 some thousand acres, some huge portion of the Pinelands area, which under the legislation. Not saying it's doing. So that's where we start from.
Right, and then you take out freshwater wetlands, and then you
preserve
take out.
it. That's
Right.
There's so many, right, wow.
But does the elimination of freshwater wetlands mean that cranberry farms cannot take part in this?
Right now, yes, and that's part of the reason that we're discussing this today, because although there is a waiver process, so if you have a citing prohibition. you can petition BPU to allow you to construct a project on lands covered by the siting prohibition.
Hmm.
And they have this, their rule proposal says that they will consult with DEP and agriculture, and it also mentions that with regard to projects in the Pinelands, they will consult with the Pinelands Commission.
Hmm.
However, they do not have the authority to waive CMP requirements. So a lot of these, and I'm gonna go to the next slide. A lot of these prohibitions then line up with restrictions in CMP. So for example, in the preservation area district, when you're talking about the preservation area overall, there's some special ag in there. There's some forest area in there, so there's some very.
Yeah, go for it.
No, first
There's
there's
agricultural
special-
production area, there's villages, there's
Right.
preservation area. But our requirements really focus on management area boundary. So most of the cranberry is gonna be in the preservation area district or the special agricultural production area. Or whether it's wetlands, whether there are wetlands or not, these are the only locations where our rules allow for a large solar facility. So very, very restrictive.
Yeah.
This is what the community is talking about. BPU can't waive these requirements. So,
Yep.
sorry,
No, thank you, it's very good.
I was just.
So. This map talks about sort of what the Pinelands siting opportunities are, and really what the map shows is. Where the APA is, where the rural development area is, overlaid on the Pinelands itself. So remember though, there are CMP requirements, so although solar facilities are permitted as a principal use. In the agricultural production area, they are limited to 20% of the parcel and no more than 10-acre maximum.
Hmm.
They have to be sited to avoid prime farmland and lands with high ecological value. And farms that are protected through the PDC program would not be eligible to participate. In the rural development area, again, solar facilities are permitted as principal use, but only on previously disturbed portions of the property. The clearing is limited to not to exceed 30% of the parcel, and they have to again avoid lands with high ecological value. The bigger issue though is that less than 10% of the RDA is in active agriculture, and if I didn't say it before, the pilot program requires that the lands be unpreserved and in active agriculture. So as you can see, as we go through the prohibitions and now through the commission's regulations, opportunities are scarce. So Sue and I have spent a couple months now, or first we tried to work through BPU, and they were interested only to the extent that if we did all the work, then maybe they'd sign something. So we started to look at, well, what were the available options within CMP that could potentially provide an opportunity for Pinelands farmers to participate in the pilot program. And I unfortunately don't have a good answer for you, but I'll walk through them. The first thing we looked at was rooming. As you know, that's a lengthy process, take at a minimum, probably about 8 months.
That's very optimistic.
Yeah, so sad, minimum.
But, okay.
But then it's unclear if the process would even be completed in time to permit participation in the pilot. And the other thing is we would be trying to develop rules without the benefit of the results from the pilot, which is the whole point of the pilot, right? The second thing we talked about was a pilot program ourselves, and that's actually what the pilot program provisions in the CMP are sort of geared to. But again, it requires rulemaking. The commission would develop its own requirements, its own criteria, it would be our program. But then also there has to be criteria to be evaluated because it's a pilot. It's we're looking at the potential impacts to Pinelands resources, whether or not it makes sense then to change the CMP overall to make that pilot permit. One of the other options was, well, we'll wait a year. We wait and see what happens with at least this first round. what they preserve, the type of projects they're seeing, the size of the projects, where they're located, and then, you know, maybe the BPU will have data. But again, it's gonna delay farmers from pursuing the pilot program, and as we've spoken about, it's 3 years, potentially 5 years long.
Yeah.
We looked at a memorandum of agreement, and the issues here are, well, with whom? Who are we really, we can only do a memorandum of agreement with the public. So in essence, what would we permit? Would we be permitting BPU to issue waivers? Well, that's not consistent with existing case law or the requirements of the CMP, which requires that if you're gonna do a deviation, the commission has to approve that. Again, lengthy process, and then there's also the question of the offset, because the deviation MOA requires an equivalent level of protection for the resources and pilots as would be provided with strict application of the rules. So what would the offset be? Who would pay the offset? There's even a legal question of whether BPU would be authorized to enter into a BPU, into an MOA, because it's not the entity that's actually doing the work.
Hmm.
And it's not work that's being done on their behalf. So lots of questions with the MOA. And thank you for explaining state agency plan, because that. And it, you know, the issues here are, it's really intended for state entities who have existing or planned development, resource management. It's not really designed to be a program where you're stepping one person beyond and permitting them to do something. You know, can we even do a deviation of the CMP through a state agency plan? I don't think so, but that was one of the questions. Can we authorize private entities to do the development? And again, the question of offset, although it's permitted, there is an offset required under a memorandum of agreement. The state agency plan is completely silent. I think to speak that in of itself is significant about utilization of this mechanism to provide for deviations. Because there's no discussion. One of the arguments that would be made against it is it's, if the commission really intended to use it that way, they would have done regulations that. So, like I said, unfortunately, staff does not have great recommendation for you. I think Sue and I came to the ultimate decision that waiting for BPU for 1 year and see how significant the project, the program was with regards to the pilots, BPU will give us that information. Probably makes the most sense.
And that's not necessarily a year, right?
That's not necessarily.
It could be less, it could be more, depending on when they
When they
take their next steps, and if we're able to engage with them in a way that we can get some information on what the interest and applications have looked like from within the pilots.
Right, that was really what we had hoped to have for you today, some understanding of that, but we just don't have that information.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when you look at the pilot program order and the guidance that's been issued on the DOI, they anticipate multiple rounds.
Right.
Whether there'll be multiple rounds in a year, or maybe this one's just incredibly slow because this is the first one. And as they get more familiar with the process, it'll move faster. I can't anticipate that. I would hope so, but.
My concern too is that I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but they've made this so complicated, the process, and where they have to go get various approvals and this and that I really question and am curious to see how many farmers, solar companies are gonna even apply and try to make it through, because even once they do that and get their approvals, when it comes to construction, remember, they have to, there's all kinds of requirements about, here's your active farm, you're gonna put your solar, and then you have to have like a demonstration, like a separate area, like where you're piloting, you've gotta have room to put one over here and see kind of compare. It's a huge undertaking for any farmer too, and solar company, and you know, we occasionally get inquiries from solar developers, agrivoltaics companies. And they ask me about specific properties, when I look at them, there's a lot of well, or that one's already deed restricted, and you know, we really are very constrained. not a lot of wiggle room, but, I do think it'd be good if we could see the results of this first round to get a better understanding of, you know, what are the issues, what projects are even coming in, who's interested, how big are the projects, where are they, you know? Yeah, I would hate to, what I don't wanna do is launch our own separate pilot program with our own criteria and not have the benefit of all the work and the piloting and the evaluation that he's doing, because it's very detailed, and like you said, Rutgers is gonna be generating a lot of good information, and I think we need that before we jump in and do something separate. So I'm still looking for a way to
Yeah.
participate in their program.
And I think that's right, but this is all incredibly helpful information, so I mean, thank you to you for putting it together and laying it out in this way. I think, I mean, I agree that the key to kind of our best path forward lies in getting some of that data and information on where it stands to this point. So I think, you know, between, you know, folks, who are liaisons with the commission, within the administration and the governor's office and other kind of ways, I think, you know, we need to pursue getting that information, because again, that's gonna be the key to what makes the most sense and is the best for the Pinelands, because I mean, obviously with the state of energy these days, you know, providing access to solar and other clean energy alternatives is critically important, and especially for the farmers who benefit it provide, so. Does anyone else have any questions, comments? Jessica, go ahead.
Thank you. It's really unfortunate that we seems to have decided to develop this pilot project in a vacuum. Maximum. With, with massive, with minimal attention to with existing.
Right, well, you know, I don't think that's necessarily what they did. They had an existing pilot, an existing program for solar. And what they did was they made this project the same. But unfortunately, the existing structure is very, very complicated.
It's not the way you set it up, it's a research project.
Right,
It's not-
and it's not,
Right,
it's set up as if it were a commercial solar project.
Exactly. Okay, so that leads me to two questions. One, what happens to the infrastructure that gets developed for these pilot projects when the project timeline comes out?
So, I mean, I didn't go into the nitty gritty of this, but there is a entire management document that they developed with Rutgers, which talks about, you know, when the stuff has to come out. And that's all something that's negotiated once the application process starts.
So that leads to my two follow-up questions, which are, one, do you know what the Rutgers contacts are? It seems to me it would be a really good point. They would be I suspect they would be much more willing to share information, being research scientists, than BPU would be. They may be under some kind of total silence or something like that, but I don't think so.
I mean, we're
It's
also a
also like-
state agency,
No,
so
I agree.
BPU, I mean, obviously, we wanna cast a wide net and talk to as many experts and folks involved in the process. But we are, BPU is a fellow state agency and should be working with us to the extent.
I don't disagree with that, to the extent you get pushback or actually just
I think it's
non-response.
more, they didn't really understand, the person who responded to the most recent email really know who they are. So we're,
That's helpful.
so we're gonna try and get to the right people, and have to a higher level discussions. It's not that they refuse to communicate with us, because that's fine, we have some good coordination in place.
Okay.
When it comes to reviewing projects and specific, when they have questions about specific sites for the community solar, I mean, that's all in place and working pretty well. This seems to have run into I don't know.
They're
It's
trying-
it
they're
seems a
trying
little
to-
chaotic.
They're tying their shoelaces together and they can't run a race with
Well,
that.
it's something for that. BPU is a very complex agency, very different from us. And they have a very structured stakeholder process. And the problem is part of that stakeholder process, we're a stakeholder to them. You know, anyone who's participating in terms of how providing comment to their program is a stakeholder, and it's very hard to get them out of that mindset. So I don't think it's intentional, it's not like we're just not giving you the information mission. No, I think it's, oh, you're a stakeholder, this is our process.
Yeah, so we're gonna try some other avenues and see if we can gather a little more information, but also talk to see if they have any suggestions about what the commission could do, see if there's any new ideas. Which sort of stuff right now, I mean, I really thought they'd be further along at this point, and we would have, you know, the first batch of applicants to help us inform our decisions, but
Given the governor's agenda, it's gonna be,
You would think that'd
the same thing, but okay, so hopefully my next here is to address your concern about changing the CMP for eligibles to adapt to something that's chaotic, as you said. I think we might entertain the notion of doing some kind of a temporary research overlay or something like that. I don't know if you've ever had any of that. Excuse me. Any other research projects come in that needed to be approved
that actually resulted in development,
well,
that's the issue.
that's why my question about.
That's a pilot.
That's
That's a pilot project. We do have pilot programs, but they require rule making and evaluation criteria. That's the thing.
That's right.
Should we do our own pilot when Review is doing its pilot? I kind of don't think so. I think one state pilot program should suffice. In terms of helping us learn what's appropriate, what the conditions of alcohol tank should be. That's what we're really looking for, is what works, what doesn't work, what's harmful, what, you know, beneficial, should there be limitation? I think we should be counting on the BPU program to tell us that, give us the parameters, and then we do.
Yes.
But that's 5 years. So I'm just, what's the interim?
I got that. I just didn't know if there was a way to do a temporary research overlay or, like, so it's a pilot project which results in infrastructure thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, it's something to maybe consider because this may not be the last time this kind of a thing comes up. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments?
I would comment that, Rutgers established a solar plant as part of the extension service in Richmond. And they're running a pilot program there as part of that can help for the farming community, but I don't know of any farmers that have signed up for the program.
Thanks, Jerry.
I want to talk to the dean of extension.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Laura, I have a couple of opinions and a couple of questions. Number one, I would agree with the staff that I have no interest at all in trying to do our own pilot project. I think that takes us away from our real mission. I have to say that I was never enamored with this concept, and after visiting the United Kingdom last September and seeing a bunch of these fields covered in solar panels, I'm even less of a fan. And it's not just the panels, it's all the infrastructure that's required to service the fields. It's the switch gear and the substations and the power lines that all are necessary. And it doesn't look to me like it meets the plan's goal of preserving the essential character of the Pinelands. And the statute does require us to preserve and enhance agriculture. But would any of these projects, these are my questions now, any of these projects would be allowed on PDC severed land?
Well, no, not unless we somehow changed our rules. I mean, the deed restrictions that are placed after credits are severed do not allow for principal use solar projects. So
Can't play soccer under them.
No. Correct. So just like they would not be permitted on farms that have been preserved through the state or county farmland preservation programs, they wouldn't be permitted on PDC restricted properties either because of the deed restriction term. So that
So-
really limits even further.
Okay. So under our rules, most agricultural projects are exempt from review. Am I correct on that? That are strictly agriculture?
Right, uses that are exclusively for agriculture don't have to apply. So barn,
I'm sorry.
so, a barn or, I don't know, storage facility for agricultural equipment, something like that doesn't apply. But, anything like an agricultural commercial establishment or a processing facility, they do require application.
Right.
And similarly, if somebody proposed a principal use solar facility in an agricultural production area, not accessory to a farm, in other words, it's not just serving the farm, that would require application now and in the future.
So the installation of, under the BPU's program, the installation of these panels would require a permit from the Pinelands?
Yeah,
And it wouldn't be considered an ancillary or accessory use. It would be a new use.
yeah, these are envisioned as principal solar facilities that serve the farm, but they're also tied into the grid, and so they're not accessory. So they
Okay.
require application.
Any other?
Sorry, clarification on that, that was an interesting conversation, thank you, Al, so. The fact that this piece of property isn't inside the Pinelands, the PPA farm, for example, goes beyond our boundary. In Southampton, would that be an ideal place for one of these pilot programs, but it won't qualify? No, it's preserved.
It's preserved.
That's right, because it won't be, yes, because it's preserved, but it would have been ideal, because it's close to development and it's within the grade.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, it would have been the next slide.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, if I
Go
may.
ahead, Mark.
I find all this really vexing. I think that a few things are obvious to me about solar development in the state of New Jersey. Number one, that the advance of development of clean energy is something that's critical to Governor Murphy's goals for clean energy by 2050. This would be a very important component of that. Also, the governor's and our own CO2 reduction goals, since we recognize the governor's plan of 50 for 2050. We need to remind ourselves of that, and that agrivoltaics would be an important way to help foster both of those goals. Now, I agree, there's very little, probably nothing, that we can do to try to improve or facilitate what is, as you pointed out, a very burdensome process that the Board of Public Utilities has adopted. We can't do anything about that, but it's certainly within our purview to address our own rules in the CMP. And what if we follow your advice and do nothing for a year while we wait to find out what may happen with regard to applications to the BPU? Don't we just continue to send a signal out to the farm community in the Pinelands that the Pinelands Commission isn't interested in doing anything to try to support those of you who might have interest in pursuing agrivoltaics as a pilot on your farm? I mean, shouldn't we be trying to show that, since BPU can't waive our rules, are we in a position to waive our rules for these types of projects? And if we're not, should we put ourselves in a position by seeking a rule change that would allow us to do that for these pilot projects rather than doing nothing? I mean, shouldn't we be sending a signal to our agricultural community here in the Pinelands that we do support this and we want to do the utmost that we can for any farmer who's interested in in trying to do a pilot project, that we won't stand in the way. We'll try to help. And I haven't been to the UK, Elena. I didn't see what you've seen, but I do know I've read the studies about the applications of agrivoltaics on American farms, particularly in Minnesota, where they have blueberry farms, where their production increased of the blueberries. This is actually a positive impact for agriculture. For certain crops, blueberries happen to be one of the most receptive crops to the benefits of agrivoltaics. They enjoy benefits from the partial shading of the solar. And I'm sure there are blueberry farmers here in the state that would have interest in trying that out and proving the concept here. I would like to see the commission to be very supportive of that and do what we can, and not just say, well, it looks like, this ball is getting fumbled, and let's let it go. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and I would say that by us learning about this and spending time talking about how, as a commission, we can help and figure this out, it does show that we want to help folks who are interested. I do think it starts with, not duplicating efforts and making sure we understand who is interested in this, where they are, and how it impacts what's happening now, is reaching into the Pinelands area, and then figure out our best path forward to do it. So don't disagree that we should figure this out. But also, I think this is a first step, and I think it shows our interest and our desire to be impactful as a commission. Any other comments or questions? Great, excuse me.
Well, stay tuned. We'll talk later about a couple things, and maybe try to get some more contact information from BPU, and then another update or some brilliant idea. We'll come back and talk about this again. Hopefully not too long.
Sooner rather than later. Thanks, everybody. Next up is Susan and Gina are going to talk about our long-term economic monitoring work.
I love this slide. This is thanks to Gina, I think, right? Because you'll see in a few minutes what we're going to be talking about is a new project to be funded using our National Park Service economic monitoring money. And then the slide will make some sense, I think. All right, getting down, right?
Yes.
No,
Is it running out? Oh, you know what it is? I think it's the layer. I'll try it again.
good. So just a reminder, every year from the Park Service for the last 30 some years, we've received about $300,000 in grant funding for long-term monitoring projects. Traditionally, half of that money is used by the Science Office and its environmental monitoring program, and the other half is devoted to what we have called economic monitoring. So you'll probably recall we did a 5-year report full of data on all kinds of parameters on municipal finance and taxes and all kinds of things. So we do that regularly. We produce reports, and then we always have a series of other projects in the work plans that we submit to the National Park Service. This list is a reminder of what was in the work plan for the federal fiscal year that we're in now, that ends September 30th. It always gets a little confusing because the federal fiscal year doesn't coincide with the state fiscal year. So this is for the federal fiscal year. This is what was approved for the economic monitoring side of the funding. These are the things we've been talking to you about and working on throughout the year, and actually multiple years. So I'll read all these notable things. That our annual calendar, for example, is produced using funding from the Park Service Economic Monitoring Program. Brad and Jared in our IT office and Matt have been working busily on revamping our very old ancient conformance and zoning system, municipal zoning system, both for the staff to use when reviewing applications and looking at ordinances, but also with an eye towards ultimately providing some version of that for public access, so that municipal representatives, applicants, consultants will be able to use the zoning system and see what's permitted where, what the conditions are, rather than calling and having us try to answer those things over the phone, or provide more information to the public. So that's in process and nearing, parts of it are nearing completion. I understand a demo in the next week or two, so I'm excited. PDC supply and demand. So we are working on that, and hope to and plan to report to the commission in October, I guess. Have some numbers there, and then we'll have those methodologies, set. And in the future, we would just simply run annual or whatever updates. So it will cease being an NPS project, but it's on here now because we're still working on that until the end of the federal fiscal year. So, a wide variety of projects, some that we've made more progress on than others. Some we'll continue working on after the end of the federal fiscal year, they'll just be funded differently. So this was just really a reminder of what's in there now. NPS requires that we draft a work plan for the new federal fiscal year well in advance, so they can then review and approve. So this is what we would be putting in our work plan for federal fiscal year 2026, starting October 1st. We have equally old, complicated, increasingly difficult to use application information system in place. And how old is it now? 1990s? Oh. Not old.
You say yes.
20 years?
2003.
It's 20 years, I'd
20 years
say,
old.
because when I got here, they were just rolling it out.
Oh, yeah.
And there was that other thing called the Dev Rev
Oh,
program, which was like,
That was
MS DOS or
1980,
something.
that
Yeah,
I have the date at my desk.
20 or so years, we'll
Yes.
say. Originally designed as really most a tracking system for applications, information submitted, letters sent. We have wrestled with it for at least 20 years to try and make it be something other than just tracking, like reporting, helping us gather information on application trends, all kinds of things, and it likes to resist, and we patched it and tried to improve it and add on to it and expand it all these years, and I think I have finally come to the realization, or willing to acknowledge, that it's never going to be what we want it to be unless we revamp it and modernize it. There's so much new technology now that we can take advantage of. We know so much more about what we want to track, be able to report on. I think the time has come to, we've always been very, oh my God, we can't. But I think the time has really come to take advantage of the staff we have today, our IT office, very knowledgeable, very able to do this work themselves rather than hiring out a consultant, which would cost a lot of money, and is what we did last time. So we proposed this as our major work plan project for 2026 and beyond. It's not a one-year project. It's multiple years. And of course, we would do another calendar, a little bit of detail on the project. We call our information system PCIS, which is Pinelands Commission Information System. Not exactly a brilliant acronym, but that's what we call it, PCIS. And usually we, growl and say derogatory things after we say PCIS. So this is the work plan period that we're planning for, that's in, we drafted this information to put in the work plan for October through September 2026. This is the beginning of the project where we would be updating the system, that's the goal. Looking at database structure, how different people are using the system. Project Regulatory Programs Office obviously is the main user. But the land use office uses it, Paul uses it when he has questions about you know, a reporter calls and wants to know what's going on with an application. We use it to generate the application status reports you see on the website. We use it to generate the data that we put in our annual report about how many of this thing did you get this year, how many new applications did you get? It's all tied into this enormous, complicated database. So we'd be looking at all these things this first year, asking people to put together their wish list. We're doing that right now. What do you want the system to be able to tell you? Write it all down, put it in this document. So we have one very long list. And then recognize and keep in mind that this is a multi-year project and some parts will be done first and earlier than others. At the end, again, just like with the zoning system, we would like to make parts of the system accessible by the public so that they will not have to call and say, what's the status of my application? Did you receive my email? They'll be able to look at it and say, oh, look, there's my email, they received it. You know, that alone, it's kind of making a joke, but we get a lot of that. We'd like to enable people to get the answers themselves. Obviously not everything in the database would be made public, there's confidential information, so there's a lot that goes into thinking about how to make this all work, but that's one of the goals. A little bit more needs assessment that's underway right now, we sort of kicked that off even though the work plan period hasn't started, but we're all busily thinking about, we all have things in the back of our minds, oh, if only this is tell me that, so that's what we're trying to sort of tease out, write that down. These are just some other things, you know, PCIS right now generates documents to be sent out to applicants. That's an interesting thing to be thinking about. Does that work? How does it work better? How can we tie it to our interactive maps that are on the website, for example? How can we use the system again to answer various public queries? And then interestingly too, you know, we've been in recent years developing new systems. I mentioned the zoning system. The local conformance system is keeping track of municipal ordinances, master plans approved over time, what the status is of those. So we have that improved and running. We have a PDC bank system that's separate, that has been improved in recent years, but certainly ties into our review of applications. And then also we use the economic monitoring money in recent years to develop a new and wonderful permanent land protection database that contains every deed restriction we've ever received or that we know about, that you can sort and see how many acres were preserved for any particular purpose. And all these things can be tied, we're hoping, you know, can be tied together and designed to work together and talk to each other in new and wonderful ways. So it's a big project, but I'm excited about it for one. And then of course, the annual calendar, we will do that again. Our theme for 2026, calendar year 2026 with water. Thought that would be appropriate. This is one of my very favorite photos.
Beautiful.
You may see that in the calendar. Listen, spoiler alert. But you know, water is, you know, there's a lot of possibilities there. It listed here some of the things photos for, ties into climate and weather, animals, plants, cranberry farming, you know, lakes, all kinds of things. So that's something to look forward to in the new year. I think that's it. Oh, there you go. That's a great picture. So we just wanted to give you a little update on what we've been working on. You'll hear more about some of those projects. You can see supply and demand. I think some of the surveys that are being done at cemeteries, right? I think Mark's gonna come do a presentation, but that's really fascinating work. And then let you know the big lift, the big project, tying back to the original slide. Let's see, can I go back? Now it makes sense, right? See all these lines and graphs and arrows. That's the information system right there. But I'm excited about it. It's long past time. I think it'll be painful, but it's going to be a benefit, hugely beneficial to the staff, but also to the public. And that's our goal. And the Park Service has our plan. They approved it.
We have not received approval, but they reviewed the draft. Assured me that the funding is secure.
That's it. Thank you. That sounds very exciting. Any questions or comments for Susan or Gina? Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
I'm always excited about the data systems update. The Park Service is paying for the development of the software. Is that what
They're funding, staff salary,
Okay,
for various, staff members who will be working on development of the new system, so that would be. Our IT office, our developers, programmers, maybe good, part of their time, doesn't fund it,
just
a good chunk.
thinking ahead, they're especially since they're renovating and doing all sorts of things. But get an update offline of that, but we got over there since I missed it. Do we have any idea what the additional hardware computing system costs going to be, so we can start planning that?
No, I don't think, we have not looked at that, I'm not
Do
sure
we
that
have
they're
capacity?
necessarily.
Do we have capacity?
Yeah, we're upgrading, we're doing a lot of upgrades right now, new servers, new, all kinds of new
Okay,
stuff.
so it's a server.
This fiscal year, that stuff's being purchased as we speak
Okay.
and so I think we'll be in a pretty good spot, with things updated and hopefully capable of handling everything.
We always need bigger a little bit, since, thank you. Oh, I also like to know, Paul, did you get positive feedback on the trails?
Yes,
Oh, so much.
Yeah.
If you could.
oh yeah,
Really
for
good.
sure. Yeah, it's one of those things where like, there are people who are from New Jersey or, grew up here and they've moved elsewhere, and there's people who contact me from all over the country wanting us to send them copies. So we're kind of in a tough spot there, but, I say, hey,
Bad part.
no, but I say I can't do it, so we have someone send it. And then they do.
Yeah, good,
That's
good.
the popularity, is what I'm trying to say.
I sent-
There
I
are
sent
people
one-
all over who want it.
Good, I sent one of mine down to somebody who does a lot, works for the state down in Mississippi, and they do a lot. So they were happy to see that too, but I was trying to get that ideas and inspiration out there to other folks.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was thinking with the water one too, there's also some opportunities to talk about our science program and our water monitoring and annual frog and toad surveys and other things that we can talk about.
They said they'd like to see something like hers, so.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you again. Next up is public comment period. Well, people in the.
Yes.
And in the room, we have Heidi. Come on up.
Oh, thank you. Although I miss having the table here. So,
We like to keep you on your toes.
Yeah,
Literally and
Boots or
figuratively.
yeah, Heidi A from Pinelands Preservation Alliance, sorry, I left half my voice at home. Thank you for the discussion today on the dual use solar program with that presentation. Unfortunately, another wrench to throw into that is the federal funding situation, since we anticipate that the tax credits for these kind of projects will be going away, probably by the end of the year, so I think projects have to demonstrate that they've started construction by the end of this year and they're in operation by 2028. So I share the sentiment that you might not want to tie yourself in knots to be able to catch this current wave, as many of these projects may need to wait another 4 years. I do find it interesting that they limit the projects to active farms, because we know of many young farmers who would like to start out on their own farms, but the numbers just don't work. And this could really be the thing that helps make it work, so I believe that's short-sighted on the part of BPU. But if you're not going to spend your time on an amendment for that, you could prioritize something like artificial turf. So I noticed in the interagency council on climate resilience and that plan that was done on extreme heat resilience released this year, there's no mention of artificial turf there, which is rather wild. So on Monday, as we were all experiencing that 100-degree plus weather here, Patterson High School decided to hold their graduation. And this resulted in 16 hospitalizations and 150 people who needed to be treated on site. All but one news site failed to mention that this graduation was held on artificial turf, which from a DEP technical memo from 2022, they mentioned that artificial turf is typically as hot, if not hotter, than asphalt. And I think that we all intuitively know that on a hot summer day, you don't want to be spending several hours on in a parking lot. But people don't really know that that also applies to artificial turf yet. Because it's made to look like grass, so we're expecting cooler conditions there. So we would definitely like to have a more substantial conversation at another P&I meeting here on the artificial turf. And PPA, I will be presenting a webinar on July 23rd, at noon. We will be trying to present everything that we think are the most relevant to the Pinelands and proposing next steps for municipalities as well as the Pinelands Commission. And then for some questions that I had with your revamp of the application system, I was wondering if you're considering integrating AI into this, although it's a pretty new technology and some thought needs to be done into doing it responsibly. I think that that could be a great boost to your productivity. So I was wondering if this reboot is being done just with in-house staff, or if you'll be outsourcing this to other people that would potentially have experience with what AI could be able to do for you. And that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Is there anyone else in the room? Anybody on the phone?
No callers.
All right, I'm gonna shut down the public comment period. Thank you, everyone. Any commissioners have any comments before we go?
Laura, I had one brief thing to say.
Go ahead, Mark.
Earlier, I mentioned a study in Minnesota. I was mistaken. The study was in Maine, and I've sent information about that to you and to the director. Hopefully, it could be shared with the committee members to point out that there are legitimate benefits of agrivoltaics to the farmer for agricultural purposes, particularly with blueberries. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Any other closing comments? Go ahead, Jessica.
My family say, Lori, but thanks staff because you're always on top of everything that we get done stuff. We really appreciate the work you do. Sorting through, gleaning, and giving us cliff notes.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn?
Move, we adjourn.
Second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All right, we'll forgive you, Paul. All right, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.